The floorboard squeaked at 2:17 in the morning, same as it had for the past 3 months. I'd been meaning to fix that loose nail, but insomnia had its advantages. Tonight, like every other restless night, the sound led me downstairs, where I discovered something that would change everything. Marta sat in our kitchen, phone pressed against her ear, giggling like a teenager who'd just been asked to prom. The sound made my stomach clench. When had she last laughed like that with me? I couldn't remember. "Thursday works perfectly," she whispered into the device. "Same place, same time. I can hardly wait." I pressed myself against the doorframe, grateful for the darkness. 23 years of marriage, and I'd become a spy in my own home. The irony wasn't lost on me. David Mitchell, certified public accountant, reduced to eavesdropping on his wife's midnight conversations. "You make me feel alive again," she continued, her voice dropping to that sultry tone I remembered from our dating days. "Like I'm not just another suburban housewife stuck in Woodpine." Woodpine, our faded industrial town where everyone knew everyone else's business, except apparently mine. I'd spent 2 decades building my small accounting practice here, helping local businesses navigate their finances while my own marriage crumbled in plain sight. Marta ended the call and padded upstairs, her silk nightgown rustling against her legs. I waited in the shadows until her footsteps faded, then grabbed a beer from the refrigerator and sat at the kitchen table where she'd been whispering sweet nothings to someone who wasn't her husband. The calendar on the wall caught my attention. Red circles marked every Thursday for the past 2 months. "Client presentations," she'd told me. "Big account, lots of pressure." Now those circles looked like targets, each one marking another betrayal. I opened my laptop and created a new spreadsheet. If there's one thing accountants know how to do, it's track patterns. Date, time, duration, location, every detail would be documented. Marta thought she was clever, but she'd forgotten who she married. I built my career on finding discrepancies that others missed. The next morning arrived with forced normalcy. Marta bustled around the kitchen, preparing for another day at Hartwell & Associates, the advertising agency where she'd been chasing a promotion for 3 years. She looked polished, professional, and completely at ease with her deception. "Don't wait up tonight," she said, not meeting my eyes. Another late client meeting. "On Tuesday?" I asked casually. "Thought those were usually Thursdays." Her coffee mug paused halfway to her lips. "Schedule changed. You know how demanding clients can be." I knew exactly how demanding they could be. What I didn't know was whether client was code for Jake Turnbull, her boss, or someone else entirely. But I'd find out. Patience had always been my strength, even when everything inside me wanted to explode. After she left, I called my office and cleared my afternoon schedule. Mrs. Henderson's tax returns could wait. Today, I had more important business to attend to. The Hartwell & Associates building sat downtown, all glass and steel, trying to look impressive in a town that had seen better days. I parked across the street at Murphy's Diner and ordered coffee, positioning myself with a clear view of the parking garage exit. At 11:45, Marta's silver Honda emerged, followed closely by a black Lexus. Jake's car. I'd seen it at company holiday parties, always parked in the spot marked "Reserved for Management." Now it was following my wife through downtown traffic like a predator stalking prey. They drove to the Lakeside Inn, Woodpine's attempt at luxury accommodations. The kind of place where traveling businessmen stayed when they wanted to impress clients, or where locals went when they wanted privacy. I watched from the parking lot as they entered separately, Marta first, then Jake 5 minutes later. Professional discretion, or so they thought. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. 23 years, 2 kids, a mortgage we'd struggled to pay during the lean years when my practice was just starting. All of it reduced to a Thursday afternoon rendezvous at a third-rate hotel. The rage built slowly, like pressure in a boiler, But instead of exploding, I channeled it into something more useful. I pulled out my phone and took photos, license plates, timestamps, the hotel sign, evidence for the spreadsheet that would become Marta's downfall. Jake's Lexus gleamed in the afternoon sun, its pristine black paint reflecting the hotel's neon sign. Such a beautiful car. Expensive. The kind of vehicle that screamed success and superiority, the kind that would look even better with a few modifications. I walked over slowly, checking for security cameras. The parking lot was poorly monitored, typical for Woodpine. From my keychain, I selected the sharpest key and dragged it along the driver's side, spelling out a message in cursive letters, cheater. The metal screeched against paint, leaving a silver scar that would cost thousands to repair. I stepped back to admire my handiwork, then returned to my car to wait. They emerged 2 hours later, Marta first as before. She looked flushed, satisfied, completely unaware that her world was about to collapse. Jake appeared 10 minutes after she'd driven away, whistling until he reached his car. The whistling stopped abruptly. He circled the Lexus twice, phone pressed to his ear, probably calling his insurance company. From across the parking lot, I could see his face turning red, his free hand gesturing wildly at the damage. I started my engine and drove home, humming an old song Marta used to love, the first move in what would become a carefully orchestrated game of chess, and I'd just put my opponent in check without him even knowing we were playing. That evening, Marta returned home at her usual time, spinning tales about difficult clients and demanding deadlines. She seemed nervous, distracted, checking her phone more frequently than usual. "Everything all right?" I asked over dinner. "Fine," she said quickly. "Just work stress. You know how it is." I knew exactly how it was, but she didn't know that I knew, which gave me the advantage. In chess, the player who sees the most moves ahead usually wins, and I was already planning my endgame. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Saw you at the hotel today. Interesting choice of parking spots." Someone had been watching me watch them. The game was more complicated than I'd thought, but that didn't change the rules. It just meant I needed to be more careful about my next move. I deleted the text and smiled at my wife across the dinner table. She was still talking about her fictitious client meeting, embellishing details that would have been impressive if they weren't complete fabrications. 23 years of marriage had taught me to recognize her tells, the way she touched her earring when she lied, the slight uptick in her voice when she invented details. "Sounds challenging," I said. "Good thing you have such a supportive boss." She nearly choked on her wine. "Jake's been very understanding about the extra hours." "I'm sure he has." I raised my glass in a mock toast. To understanding bosses and the wives who appreciate them. The color drained from her face, but she recovered quickly. Too quickly. She was getting better at this deception game, which meant she'd been practicing longer than I'd suspected. After dinner, I retreated to my home office and opened the spreadsheet. One entry so far, but it was a start. Tomorrow, I'd begin the real investigation. Not just documenting her affair, but understanding its scope, its players, and most importantly, its weaknesses. Every good accountant knows that numbers tell stories. Bank statements, credit card records, phone bills, they all leave trails that liars think they can hide. But I'd built my career following those trails, and I'd never lost a case to creative bookkeeping. Marta thought she was smarter than me. Jake probably did too. They saw a quiet accountant, a man who'd spent his life in the background, while more dynamic people took center stage. They had no idea that the quiet ones are often the most dangerous, because we watch, we listen, and we remember everything. The anonymous text bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Someone else knew about the affair, someone who'd been watching the watchers. In a town like Woodpine, secrets had a way of spreading like wildfire, but they also had a way of being weaponized by those smart enough to collect them. I needed allies, people who had as much to lose as I did. Jake was married. I'd met his wife Linda at company parties. Quiet woman, always seemed a bit overwhelmed by her husband's larger-than-life personality. I wondered if she suspected anything, if she'd noticed the same changes in Jake that I'd seen in Marta. The laptop screen glowed in the darkened office as I searched LinkedIn for Linda Turnbull. Her profile was sparse: part-time work at the local library, volunteer activities, the digital footprint of someone who lived in her husband's shadow. But shadows could be useful places to hide, and people in shadows often saw things that others missed. I crafted a careful message, nothing that could be traced back to suspicions about our spouses. Just a suggestion that we meet for coffee, discuss the upcoming company picnic that Marta was supposedly helping to organize. Innocent enough to avoid suspicion, specific enough to gauge her interest. The message sent, I closed the laptop and headed upstairs. Marta was already in bed, pretending to sleep, but her breathing was too controlled, too deliberate. She was thinking about something, probably replaying her afternoon at the Lakeside Inn. I lay down beside her, close enough to smell her perfume. A new scent I didn't recognize. Another small detail for the spreadsheet. Another piece of evidence in the case I was building against my own wife. Sleep came eventually, but it was filled with dreams of chessboards and hotel parking lots, of silver scars on black paint, and the sound of my wife laughing for someone else. When morning came, I was ready to make my next move. Linda Turnbull agreed to meet me at Murphy's Diner, the same place where I'd watched her husband follow my wife to their afternoon rendezvous. She arrived precisely on time, clutching a worn leather purse and looking around nervously as if she expected someone to be watching. "Thank you for meeting me," I said, standing as she approached the booth. "I hope I wasn't too forward reaching out." "Not at all." Her voice was softer than I remembered from company events, almost fragile. "I don't get out much during the day. It's nice to have adult conversation that doesn't involve library card renewals." We ordered coffee and made small talk about the weather, the town's declining economy, anything except the real reason we were both here. But I could see it in her eyes, the same haunted look I'd been wearing for months, the expression of someone who suspected their world was built on lies but hadn't yet found the courage to examine the foundation. "How's Jake handling the stress at work?" I asked casually. "Marta says things have been intense lately." Linda's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as she set it down. "He's been working a lot of late nights and weekends. Says the company is pursuing some big accounts that require extra attention. Thursdays seem particularly busy." The words hung between us like a confession. Linda's face went pale, then flushed red as understanding dawned. She wasn't stupid. She'd probably suspected for months, but hadn't wanted to confront the truth. Now a stranger was confirming her worst fears over coffee and day-old pie. "How long have you known?" she whispered. 3 weeks since I had proof. Months since I started suspecting. I leaned forward, keeping my voice low. "The question is, what do we do about it?" Linda stared into her coffee as if it might contain answers. When she looked up, her eyes had hardened with a resolve I hadn't expected. "Jake thinks I'm stupid. Thinks I don't notice the new cologne, the extra showers, the way he checks his phone constantly. But I've been married to him for 18 years. I know when something's changed." She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder, thick with papers. "I've been documenting things too. Hotel charges on credit cards, unexplained absences, phone records. I even hired a private investigator last month." My respect for Linda Turnbull increased exponentially. The quiet librarian had been conducting her own investigation, probably more thorough than mine. "What did you find?" "More than I wanted to." She opened the folder, revealing printed screenshots of text messages, photos of Jake entering the Lakeside Inn, credit card statements highlighting suspicious charges. "It's not just your wife, David. There have been others. Your Marta is just the latest in a pattern that goes back 2 years." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Bad enough that my wife was having an affair, But learning she was just another conquest in Jake's ongoing campaign of infidelity made it worse somehow. She wasn't even special enough to be his only mistress. "Why haven't you confronted him?" I asked. "Same reason you haven't confronted Marta, I suspect. Because once you pull that trigger, there's no going back. Divorce, custody battles, splitting assets, it's going to be messy no matter what. So I figured, if I was going to blow up my life, I might as well do it right." Linda Turnbull was full of surprises. Behind that librarian exterior was a strategist who understood that revenge was a dish best served with documentation and witnesses. "What did you have in mind?" I asked. "Maximum impact, public humiliation. Make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man Jake Turnbull really is and what kind of woman would participate in destroying someone else's marriage." Her plan was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of private confrontations that could be denied or minimized, we'd orchestrate a public revelation that would leave no room for excuses or damage control. The company picnic was next month, but that seemed too far away. We needed something sooner, more intimate, where the fallout would be concentrated and devastating. "I have an idea," I said, "but it requires perfect timing and nerves of steel." Linda smiled for the first time since sitting down. "I've been living with a cheating husband for 2 years. My nerves are already steel." We spent the next hour planning what would become known in Woodpine social circles as the dinner party massacre. I would host a family celebration at my house. Nothing too elaborate, just close friends and colleagues. Marta would be encouraged to invite her work associates, including Jake. Linda would arrive as Jake's devoted wife, carrying a folder full of evidence that would destroy both our spouses simultaneously. "The key is documentation," Linda said, pulling out her phone. "I'll record everything, audio, video, whatever we can get. Even if they try to spin this later, we'll have proof of their reactions." We exchanged contact information and agreed to meet again in a few days to finalize details. As Linda gathered her papers, I noticed her hands were steady now, her voice confident. The decision to fight back had transformed her from victim to warrior. "One more thing," she said as we prepared to leave. "That text you got yesterday about being seen at the hotel? That was from me. I've been watching them too, and I saw you key Jake's car." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. I probably shouldn't have done that. "Are you kidding? It was the most satisfying thing I've seen in months. Jake spent 3 hours on the phone with his insurance company, ranting about vandalism and security cameras. He never suspected it was connected to his affair." We parted ways in the parking lot, two conspirators united by betrayal and bound by a shared desire for justice. I drove home feeling more energized than I had in months. The helpless rage was transforming into focused determination, and for the first time since discovering Marta's affair, I felt like I was in control of the situation. That evening, I announced my plan over dinner. "I've been thinking we should have a dinner party," I told Marta. "Nothing fancy, just some close friends and family. It's been too long since we entertained." Marta looked suspicious. I rarely suggested social gatherings, preferring quiet evenings at home to the performative nature of dinner parties. "What's the occasion? Do we need one? I thought it might be nice to reconnect with people. Maybe you could invite some of your colleagues from work. Jake, certainly. I'd like to get to know him better." The color drained from her face. The idea of Jake in our home, sitting at our dinner table while she tried to maintain the illusion of a happy marriage, clearly terrified her, but she couldn't refuse without raising suspicions. "I suppose that would be nice," she said carefully. "When were you thinking?" "This Saturday. Keep it simple. Maybe 8 people total. You, me, the kids if they're available, Jake and Linda, maybe Pete from the gym and his wife. Intimate enough for good conversation." Marta's phone buzzed with a text. She glanced at it quickly, then set it face down on the table. But I'd seen enough to recognize Jake's contact photo, a professional headshot that made him look more important than he actually was. "I should check if Jake's available," she said, reaching for the phone. "Already did. Ran into Linda at the grocery store and mentioned it. They're both free Saturday night. The lie came easily, another skill I was developing in this new reality where deception was currency and truth was a luxury I couldn't afford. Marta's expression shifted from suspicion to panic as she realized she'd been outmaneuvered. "Great," she said weakly. "I'll make sure Jake knows." I'm sure she would, probably along with a frantic explanation of why having him in our home was a terrible idea. But it was too late to back out without seeming rude or suspicious. The trap was set, and all that remained was waiting for Saturday night. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. I cleaned the house thoroughly, planned a menu that would keep everyone at the table for maximum conversation time, and rehearsed my role as the oblivious husband hosting his wife's lover for dinner. Linda and I exchanged texts daily, coordinating our strategy and refining the details. She'd compiled a comprehensive dossier on Jake's affairs, complete with dates, locations, and evidence that would be impossible to deny. The folder had grown even thicker since our first meeting. "I found something interesting," she texted Wednesday evening. "Jake's been using the company credit card for some of these hotel visits. That's grounds for termination, even without the adultery." The professional implications added another layer to our revenge. Jake wouldn't just lose his marriage, he'd lose his job, his reputation, and possibly face criminal charges for misusing company funds. The man who'd thought he was clever enough to seduce my wife was about to learn that actions have consequences. Friday night, Marta came home later than usual, claiming she'd been shopping for wine for the dinner party. She seemed nervous, distracted, checking her phone constantly. I wondered if she and Jake were planning some kind of strategy for tomorrow night, some way to maintain their secret while sitting across from each other at my dinner table. "Everything all right?" I asked, as she poured herself a large glass of the wine she'd supposedly just bought. "Fine. Just tired. It's been a long week." Long weeks, late nights, stressful clients. The vocabulary of deception had become Marta's second language. But tomorrow night, we'd be speaking in truths, and I suspected she wasn't going to like the conversation. Saturday arrived gray and overcast, typical weather for Woodpine in late fall. I spent the morning cooking, preparing dishes that would keep me busy in the kitchen and provide natural opportunities to observe our guests without seeming to hover. At 5 o'clock, I opened a beer and surveyed my preparations. The dining room table was set for 8, candles ready to light, wine breathing on the sideboard. Everything looked perfect for what would either be the most satisfying evening of my life or a complete disaster that would destroy whatever remained of my marriage. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda. "Ready for battle. See you at 6:30. I raised my beer in a toast to the empty room. Here's to truth, justice, and the American way of making cheaters pay for their crimes. The doorbell would ring in 90 minutes, and my carefully orchestrated plan would either succeed brilliantly or explode in my face. Either way, the quiet accountant from Woodpine was about to make some noise. The first guests arrived at 6:30 sharp. Pete Morrison and his wife Carol, old friends who'd been part of our social circle since the kids were small. Pete owned the boxing gym where I'd been spending my frustrated evenings, and Carol taught 3rd grade at the elementary school where our children had learned to read. Safe choices, people who'd known us long enough to recognize when something was wrong. "Smells incredible in here," Carol said, handing me a bottle of wine. "What's the occasion?" "Just felt like cooking for friends," I replied, taking their coats. "Marta should be down in a minute." She was upstairs, had been for the past hour, changing clothes 3 times and applying makeup with the precision of someone preparing for battle. The anxiety was eating her alive, which was exactly what I'd hoped for. Pete clapped me on the shoulder. "Good to see you entertaining again. You've seemed a bit distant lately." If only he knew how distant I'd become from my own life. But that was about to change. The doorbell rang again. Through the window, I could see Jake's repaired Lexus in the driveway, its fresh paint gleaming under the porch light. He'd done an excellent job covering the scars I'd left, but some damage goes deeper than the surface. I opened the door to find Jake and Linda standing together, the picture of marital harmony. Jake looked confident, relaxed, probably thinking he was clever enough to charm his way through dinner with his mistress and her husband. Linda appeared nervous but determined, clutching a leather portfolio that contained enough evidence to destroy him. "David!" Jake boomed, extending his hand. "Great to finally see your place. Marta talks about it all the time." I'll bet she does. Probably complains about how ordinary it is compared to the luxury hotels where they conduct their affair. "Welcome. Come in. Make yourselves comfortable." Linda kissed my cheek in greeting, a gesture that looked friendly but allowed her to whisper, "Everything's ready. Just give me the signal." Marta appeared at the top of the stairs, descending like an actress making her entrance. She'd chosen a black dress that was simultaneously elegant and conservative, appropriate for dinner with colleagues, but nothing that might seem like she was trying to impress anyone in particular. The performance was flawless, except for the terror in her eyes. "Jake, Linda, so wonderful you could make it." Her voice was pitched slightly higher than normal, the telltale sign of stress she'd never learned to control. Jake moved forward to greet her, and I watched carefully for any sign of inappropriate familiarity. They shook hands briefly, professionally, but I caught the way his fingers lingered against hers, the subtle smile that passed between them. 23 years of marriage had taught me to read my wife's expressions, and right now she looked like a woman greeting her lover while his wife and her husband watched. The final guests arrived as we were settling in the living room with drinks. Ross and Amelia, our children, home from college for the weekend. I'd specifically invited them, wanting family present for what was about to unfold. They deserved to know the truth about their mother, even if it would hurt them. "This is nice, Dad," Amelia said, accepting a glass of wine. "Very domestic of you." Ross was more suspicious. At 22, he'd inherited my analytical nature and his mother's ability to read people. He studied Jake with undisguised curiosity, probably wondering why his mother's boss was having dinner at our house on a Saturday night. We moved to the dining room at 7:30, and I watched everyone take their seats. I'd planned the arrangement carefully, Marta and Jake positioned where they could see each other but not sit together, Linda directly across from her husband, our children flanking me at the head of the table. Pete and Carol filled out the group, unwitting witnesses to what was about to become the most memorable dinner party in Woodpine history. The first course passed without incident. Conversation flowed easily, covering safe topics like the weather, local politics, and the challenges facing small towns in the modern economy. Jake dominated much of the discussion, his voice booming with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. "The key to successful business," he proclaimed, gesturing with his wine glass, "is understanding what people really want, even when they don't know it themselves." "And what do people want?" Linda asked quietly. "Excitement, passion, something that makes them feel alive again." His eyes flicked toward Marta as he spoke. Too many people settle for comfortable when they could have extraordinary. I nearly laughed at his audacity. The man was discussing his philosophy of adultery at my dinner table, probably thinking he was being clever and subtle. But I could see Linda's jaw tightening, her grip on her wine glass becoming more pronounced. "Comfort has its advantages," I said mildly. "Reliability, trust, the knowledge that someone has your back no matter what. Some people might consider those things more valuable than temporary excitement." "Temporary?" Jake's smile was condescending. "Who says it has to be temporary?" The conversation was moving exactly where I wanted it to go. Jake's arrogance was on full display, his contempt for conventional morality clear to everyone at the table. Even Pete was starting to look uncomfortable with the direction of the discussion. I excused myself to check on the main course, using the opportunity to send Linda a quick text. "After dessert, Be ready. When I returned with the roast, the conversation had shifted to work topics. Marta was describing a challenging client campaign, her voice more animated than it had been in months. She was in her element, discussing strategy and creative solutions, reminding me of the woman I'd fallen in love with 23 years ago, the woman who'd apparently decided that our marriage was too boring to sustain her interest. Marta's been invaluable on this project, Jake said, raising his glass toward her. Her insights have been illuminating. Another double entendre, another private joke shared at my expense. But Linda was recording everything on her phone, positioned discreetly beside her plate. Every word, every gesture, every telling glance was being documented for posterity. Dessert arrived with coffee and brandy, the final course before the evening's main event. I'd chosen chocolate cake, rich and indulgent, something that would keep people lingering at the table. The mood was relaxed now, wine and good food having done their work to lower everyone's guard. I'd like to propose a toast, I said, standing and raising my glass. To friendship, loyalty, and the bonds that hold us together through good times and bad. Everyone raised their glasses, even Jake, who was probably too drunk to recognize the irony. Marta's hand trembled slightly as she lifted her wine, some instinct warning her that danger was approaching. And speaking of bonds, I continued, Linda has something she'd like to share with the group, a little presentation about trust and marriage. The color drained from Jake's face as Linda stood, portfolio in hand. Marta's wineglass froze halfway to her lips, her eyes wide with sudden understanding. The trap was springing, and there was nowhere to run. Thank you, David. Linda's voice was steady now, all traces of the nervous librarian gone. I've prepared a little slideshow about modern relationships. I think everyone will find it educational. She opened the portfolio and began distributing printed photographs around the table. Hotel entrance timestamps, credit card receipts, text message screenshots, a comprehensive record of Jake's affair with my wife, documented with the thoroughness of a legal brief. The silence that followed was deafening. Pete and Carol stared at the evidence in shock, our children's faces cycling through confusion, understanding, and anger. Jake's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, while Marta sat frozen, her wineglass still suspended in midair. These photos were taken over the past 6 weeks, Linda continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. Hotel visits every Thursday afternoon charged to the company credit card, text messages discussing their next rendezvous, even a few pictures of them entering and leaving together, just in case anyone thought this might be coincidental. Ross was the first to speak. Mom? Is this real? Marta finally set down her wineglass, but her hands were shaking so badly that liquid sloshed onto the white tablecloth, spreading like a stain across the fabric. I can explain. Explain what? Amelia's voice was sharp, cutting. Explain how you've been lying to all of us. Explain how you've been sneaking around with your boss while Dad made dinner and pretended everything was normal. Jake tried to stand, probably planning some kind of damage control speech, but Linda placed a firm hand on his shoulder, pushing him back into his chair. Sit down. We're not finished. She pulled out her phone and began reading from the screen. Text message from Jake to Marta, sent last Tuesday at 2:15 p.m. Can't wait to taste you again. Thursday can't come soon enough. Response from Marta. You make me feel like a woman again, not just a wife. The words hung in the air like poison gas, contaminating everything they touched. I watched my wife's face crumble as her private thoughts were exposed to our family and friends. The intimate words she'd shared with her lover, now revealed as evidence of her betrayal. There's more, Linda continued, flipping through pages of printed messages, discussions of their future together, complaints about their respective spouses, even plans for a weekend getaway next month, all documented, all saved, all admissible in divorce court. Jake finally found his voice. This is a violation of privacy. Privacy? Linda's laugh was harsh, bitter. You gave up privacy when you started using our joint credit card to pay for hotel rooms, when you came home smelling like another woman's perfume, when you decided that 18 years of marriage meant less to you than a few hours of excitement with someone else's wife. The room erupted in chaos. Marta was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks in black streams. Jake was shouting about lawsuits and harassment, his face red with rage and embarrassment. Our children were demanding explanations, their voices overlapping in a chorus of hurt and confusion. But through it all, I sat calmly at the head of my table, watching the destruction of my marriage with the detached interest of an accountant reviewing a particularly complex audit. The numbers didn't lie, the evidence was conclusive, and the case was closed. Pete leaned over and whispered, "Did you know about this?" "I suspected," I replied quietly. Linda and I compared notes. Turns out we both married people who thought they were smarter than they actually were. The evening ended with Jake and Marta fleeing separately. Their carefully maintained secret exploded beyond any hope of repair. Linda gathered her evidence with the satisfaction of someone who'd just won a decisive victory, while our children sat in stunned silence, processing the reality that their family had been built on lies. As I cleared the dishes, I found myself humming an old song, something I hadn't done in months. The quiet accountant from Woodpine had just orchestrated the most effective revenge in the town's history, and the best part was that it had all been true. No lies, no exaggeration, just facts presented at the most devastating possible moment. The real fireworks would start Monday morning, when Linda delivered copies of her evidence to Jake's superiors at Hartwell and Associates. But that was tomorrow's entertainment. Tonight, I was content to wash dishes and plan my next move in the chess game that my marriage had become. Checkmate was still several moves away, but I could see it clearly now, and I suspected that my opponents were just beginning to understand how badly they'd underestimated their quiet, boring, supposedly harmless adversary. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything seem possible. I dressed carefully for work, choosing my best suit and the tie Marta had bought me for our anniversary 2 years ago. If irony was going to be the theme of the week, I might as well embrace it completely. The phone started ringing at 7:30. First Marta, calling from her sister Victoria's house where she'd apparently spent the weekend. I let it go to voicemail, along with the 6 subsequent calls that followed in rapid succession. Whatever she had to say could wait until I'd finished my morning coffee and reviewed the day's agenda. Linda texted at 8 o'clock. "Package delivered to HR. Meeting scheduled for 9:30. We'll keep you posted." I smiled as I deleted the message. While I'd been sleeping peacefully in my own bed, Linda had been busy ensuring that Jake's professional life would implode with the same spectacular efficiency as his personal one. The woman was turning out to be a far more effective partner than I'd anticipated. My office was quiet, a refuge from the chaos that was undoubtedly erupting across town. I spent the morning working on legitimate client files, the familiar rhythm of numbers and calculations providing a soothing counterpoint to the emotional wreckage of the weekend. But concentration was difficult when I kept checking my phone for updates from Linda. The first news came at 10:15. Jake suspended pending investigation, escorted from building by security. His secretary said he looked like he might vomit. The image of Jake Turnbull, master of the universe, being walked out of his own office by security guards, was almost too delicious to believe. The man who'd thought he was untouchable, brought down by hotel receipts and text messages. Sometimes justice was beautifully simple. My phone rang at 11. The caller ID showed Hartwell and Associates' main number. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity won. David Mitchell speaking. "Mr. Mitchell, this is Patricia Wells from Human Resources at Hartwell and Associates. I was wondering if you might have time to speak with me today about a personnel matter." Patricia Wells. I'd met her at company parties, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd probably seen every variety of workplace drama imaginable. The fact that she was calling me personally meant that Linda's evidence had made quite an impression. Of course. What time works for you? Would 1 o'clock be convenient? I can come to your office if that's easier. Interesting. She wanted to meet on my turf, probably to avoid any appearance of intimidation or corporate pressure. That would be fine. Do you need directions? I have the address. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. I look forward to our conversation. She hung up before I could ask what the meeting was about, though we both knew the answer. Jake's affair with Marta wasn't just a personal matter anymore. It was a corporate liability that could expose Hartwell and Associates to lawsuits, bad publicity, and regulatory scrutiny. I spent the lunch hour preparing for Patricia's visit, organizing the timeline I'd compiled, and printing copies of the evidence Linda had shared with me. If they wanted a full accounting of Jake's behavior, I was prepared to provide one with the thoroughness that had built my reputation in this town. Patricia arrived precisely at 1 o'clock, carrying a leather briefcase that probably contained enough documentation to end Jake's career permanently. She was younger than I'd remembered, maybe late 40s, with the kind of direct gaze that suggested she didn't tolerate nonsense from anyone. Thank you for seeing me on short notice, she said, accepting my offer of coffee. I imagine this situation has been difficult for you and your family. Difficult is one word for it. I gestured toward the conference table where I'd laid out my materials. Though I have to say, discovering the truth was preferable to living with suspicion. She nodded approvingly. Linda Turnbull spoke very highly of your cooperation in documenting this situation. She said you were thorough and professional throughout the process. I'm an accountant. Thorough and professional are occupational requirements. Patricia smiled at that, the first genuine warmth she'd shown since arriving. May I ask how long you suspected something was wrong? Months, but I didn't have proof until 3 weeks ago. I walked her through the timeline, showing her the calendar anomalies, the hotel surveillance, the credit card evidence that Linda had uncovered. The pattern was clear once I started documenting it systematically. And you chose to wait until Saturday night to confront them? Linda and I agreed that a public revelation would be more effective than private confrontations. Harder to deny, impossible to minimize. I paused, studying her expression. I assume Jake has already provided his version of events? Patricia's smile turned grim. Mr. Turnbull spent considerable time this morning explaining how this was all a misunderstanding, how the evidence was taken out of context, how he was being framed by a vindictive spouse and a jealous husband. And you believed him? Mr. Mitchell, I've been in human resources for 22 years. I've heard every excuse, every justification, every creative interpretation of company policy that the human mind can devise. Jake Turnbull's performance this morning wasn't even original. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder, its contents organized with the same attention to detail that Linda had brought to her investigation. What I'd like from you is a formal statement, something we can use in our internal investigation and any potential legal proceedings. Legal proceedings. The words hung in the air like a promise of further justice. Jake hadn't just violated his marriage vows, he'd violated company policy, misused corporate resources, and created a hostile work environment. The consequences were going to extend far beyond a simple termination. We spent the next hour going through my evidence piece by piece, Patricia taking notes and asking clarifying questions with the precision of someone building an airtight case. She was particularly interested in the timeline, the pattern of behavior that suggested this wasn't Jake's first affair with a subordinate. Has your wife provided any information about other relationships Jake might have had with employees? Patricia asked. We haven't spoken since Saturday night. She's staying with her sister, and I'm not particularly interested in conversation until my lawyer has reviewed our options. Understandable. But if she does share any additional information, I hope you'll pass it along. This investigation isn't just about what happened between Jake and Marta. It's about creating a safe workplace for all our employees. I promised to cooperate fully, though I suspected Marta would be more focused on damage control than workplace safety. Her career at Hartwell and Associates was probably over regardless of what happened to Jake, and she'd be scrambling to find new employment in a town where everyone would know exactly why she'd left her previous job. Patricia packed up her materials and prepared to leave, but paused at the door. "Can I ask you something, Mr. Mitchell? This whole situation, the investigation, the documentation, the public confrontation, it seems very calculated, very thorough. Was this about justice, or was it about revenge?" The question caught me off guard, though I supposed it was inevitable. Does it matter? The evidence is real, the violations are clear, and the consequences are appropriate. Whether I was motivated by justice or revenge doesn't change the facts. No, it doesn't. But it might change how people perceive your actions going forward. Woodpine is a small town, and reputations matter. She was warning me, I realized, suggesting that my methodical destruction of Jake and Marta's lives might be seen as excessive, vindictive, unbecoming of a respected member of the community. The quiet accountant was supposed to suffer in silence, not orchestrate elaborate revenge schemes that left his enemies professionally and personally destroyed. "I appreciate the advice," I said carefully, "but I'm not particularly concerned about how people perceive my actions. I'm concerned about the truth and making sure there are consequences for people who think they can lie and cheat without accountability." Patricia nodded, though I could see she wasn't entirely convinced. "Just be careful, Mr. Mitchell. Sometimes the line between justice and revenge is thinner than we think." After she left, I sat in my office reviewing the conversation and considering her warning. Was I going too far? Was the systematic destruction of my wife's life and career crossing some moral boundary that I should respect? The answer came when I checked my voicemail and heard Marta's voice, tearful and desperate. "David, please call me. We need to talk. I know you're angry, but what you did Saturday night was cruel and humiliating. Our marriage problems should have stayed private. You've destroyed everything. My job, my reputation, my relationship with the kids. I hope you're satisfied." Satisfied? I was just getting started. Linda texted again at 4 o'clock. "Jake officially terminated. Security clearance revoked. References will reflect termination for cause. He's finished in this industry." The professional consequences were complete, but the personal ones were just beginning. Jake would have to explain to friends, family, and future employers why he'd been fired from a job he'd held for 8 years. His reputation in Woodpine was permanently damaged, his marriage was over, and his financial future was uncertain. But Marta was still out there, probably plotting some kind of comeback strategy with her sister Victoria. The woman who'd enabled and encouraged the affair, who'd covered for Marta's lies and helped her maintain the deception. Victoria had always disliked me, considered me unworthy of her successful sister, and she'd probably see this as an opportunity to turn Marta against me completely. I locked up the office and drove home through the quiet streets of Woodpine, past the hotel where my wife had betrayed our marriage, past the company where her lover had just lost his career, past all the familiar landmarks of a life that no longer existed. The house felt different now, emptier, but also cleaner, as if removing the lies had purified the air itself. The mailbox contained divorce papers, delivered with impressive speed by Marta's attorney. She was moving quickly, probably hoping to control the narrative and minimize the financial damage, but she'd forgotten who she was dealing with. The man who'd spent his career untangling complex financial situations and finding hidden assets that people thought they could conceal. I poured a beer and sat at the kitchen table where this had all started, where I'd first overheard her whispered phone conversations and realized that my marriage was a fraud. The divorce papers were professionally prepared, requesting an equitable division of assets and joint custody of our adult children. Equitable. After 23 years of marriage and months of calculated betrayal, she wanted equitable treatment. The woman who'd been planning a romantic getaway with her lover while I cooked dinner and pretended everything was normal. I picked up my phone and dialed my attorney's number. If Marta wanted to play hardball, She was about to discover that the quiet accountant had learned some new games during his recent education in deception and revenge. The real war was just beginning, and I intended to win it as decisively as I'd won the opening battles. Justice might be blind, but revenge had perfect vision, and mine was focused clearly on the complete destruction of everyone who'd thought they could make me a fool. 3 weeks had passed since the dinner party massacre, and Woodpine was still buzzing with gossip about the spectacular implosion of the Mitchell marriage. I'd become something of a local celebrity, the cuckolded husband who'd turned the tables on his cheating wife with ruthless efficiency. Some people admired my tactical brilliance, others whispered that I'd gone too far, that revenge was supposed to be served cold, not nuclear. I didn't care about their opinions. What mattered was that phase 1 of my plan had succeeded beyond my wildest expectations. Jake was unemployed and unemployable, his reputation destroyed throughout the regional business community. Marta was staying with her sister Victoria, scrambling to find new employment while dealing with divorce proceedings that were becoming more contentious by the day. But I wasn't finished. Not even close. The breakthrough came on a Thursday morning, how fitting, when Linda called with information that changed everything. "I found something," she said without preamble. "Something that's going to make you very happy and very angry at the same time." We met at Murphy's Diner, our usual spot for conspiracy and revelation. Linda looked different now, more confident, as if destroying her husband's life had liberated something fundamental in her personality. She'd filed for divorce the Monday after our dinner party and was pursuing a settlement that would leave Jake financially devastated for years to come. "Remember how we thought Jake was the mastermind of this affair?" she asked, sliding a manila folder across the table. "Turns out we were wrong. He was just the puppet." I opened the folder to find a collection of documents that made my previous evidence look amateur by comparison. Bank records, email printouts, phone logs, and photographs that told a story I'd never suspected. "Victoria," I said, staring at a photo of Marta's sister meeting with Jake at a coffee shop 3 months before the affair began. "She orchestrated this whole thing." "Not just orchestrated it. She's been blackmailing Jake for months, threatening to expose the affair unless he helped her with some business deal that went bad 2 years ago. Your wife wasn't Jake's conquest, David. She was bait in Victoria's revenge scheme against you." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. I'd spent weeks thinking Marta had betrayed me for passion, for excitement, for the thrill of an extramarital affair. I'd replayed every late night, every distracted glance, every unexplained absence through that narrow lens, telling myself it was the oldest story in the world. The truth was worse. She'd betrayed me as part of her sister's elaborate plot to destroy my reputation and steal my business clients. It wasn't desire or weakness that had driven her. It was strategy. And that realization left me breathless, as if the ground beneath everything I thought I understood had suddenly collapsed. "Why?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. The question felt almost ceremonial, a formality before the inevitable explanation confirmed what was already forming in my mind. "The Brennan account. Remember when Victoria's marketing firm lost that contract 2 years ago, and the client came to you for financial consulting instead? She blamed you for sabotaging her business, convinced herself that you'd stolen her client through some kind of underhanded maneuvering." I remembered. Of course I did. Brennan Industries had been Victoria's biggest client until they discovered she'd been inflating her invoices and charging for services never performed. The audit had been damning, the kind of thing that couldn't be spun away with charm or excuses. When they fired her firm, they'd asked me to review their books and help them recover the stolen money. It had been a legitimate business transaction, transparent and above board. I'd done my job, nothing more. But Victoria had never forgiven me for profiting from her downfall, for being the one who cleaned up the mess she'd created. So she decided to destroy my marriage as payback? The words tasted strange in my mouth, absurd and horrifying at the same time. She decided to destroy everything. Your marriage, your reputation, your business. The affair was just the opening move. Jake was supposed to seduce Marta, document everything, then expose the relationship publicly to humiliate you. But he got greedy, started thinking he could actually steal your wife permanently. The idea made my stomach turn. What I thought was a personal betrayal had been engineered from the start, every message and meeting part of a larger design. Linda pulled out another document, this one showing financial transfers between Victoria's accounts and Jake's. Dates, amounts, notes attached to the payments, too consistent to be coincidence. She's been paying him monthly bonuses for keeping Marta interested and maintaining the affair. But when he started talking about divorce and running away together, Victoria realized she was losing control of the situation. "That's when she contacted you?" I asked, already bracing myself for the answer. That's when she made her first mistake. She sent Jake a threatening email, telling him to end things with Marta or face exposure. But she copied it to the wrong address, sent it to my personal account instead of Jake's work email. I've been sitting on it for weeks, trying to figure out what it meant. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Details that had felt random or inexplicable suddenly aligned, forming a picture that was far uglier than anything I'd imagined. Victoria had manipulated everyone, her own sister, Jake, even me, in service of a revenge plot that made my dinner party ambush look like amateur theater. She'd turned Marta into an unwitting weapon against her own husband, destroyed Jake's career as collateral damage, and nearly succeeded in obliterating my reputation in the process. "Where's Victoria now?" I asked, the question sharp with urgency. That's the interesting part. She disappeared 3 days ago, cleaned out her bank accounts, closed her office, told her landlord she was moving out of state for family reasons. But I don't think she's gone far. Linda was right. Victoria wouldn't leave town until she was sure her revenge was complete, until she'd witnessed the full destruction of my life and reputation. She was probably hiding somewhere local, watching from a distance, waiting for the divorce proceedings to reach their climax so she could enjoy the spectacle of my final humiliation. But Victoria had made the same mistake that Jake and Marta had made. She'd underestimated the quiet accountant from Woodpine. She'd assumed discretion meant weakness, that patience meant passivity. And now that I knew the truth about her involvement, I was going to make sure she paid for every lie, every manipulation, every moment of pain she'd caused my family. "I need you to do something for me," I told Linda. "Something that's going to require perfect timing and nerves of steel." She smiled, the expression of someone who'd discovered a talent for warfare. "What did you have in mind?" The plan that emerged over the next hour was more elaborate than anything I'd attempted before. Instead of a simple confrontation, we were going to stage a public revelation that would expose Victoria's manipulation while simultaneously destroying her credibility and her remaining business relationships. Every step was calculated, every contingency discussed. The venue would be the Woodpine Community Center, where the annual Chamber of Commerce dinner was scheduled for Saturday night. Half the town's business leaders would be there, along with local politicians, civic organizations, and social media influencers who could spread the story throughout the region. Victoria wouldn't be able to resist attending. The event was too perfect an opportunity to witness my social destruction, to see the fruits of her 2-year revenge campaign. She'd probably bought a ticket weeks ago, planning to sit in the audience and savor my humiliation as the town's business community learned about my wife's affair and my family's collapse. Instead, she was going to become the evening's main entertainment. Linda had connections throughout the community: library board members, school volunteers, civic organizations, where she'd been quietly building relationships while her husband was pursuing his extramarital adventures. She could ensure that Victoria's manipulations were exposed to exactly the right audience, people who had the power to destroy her remaining reputation and business prospects. "What about Marta?" Linda asked. "She's as much a victim in this as anyone." Is she? I pulled out my phone and showed Linda a text I'd received that morning. She wants to reconcile, says she's realized what she's lost, that the affair was a mistake she'll regret forever. But there's no mention of Victoria, no acknowledgement that she was being manipulated. Either she's still lying to me, or she's lying to herself. The text was pathetic, desperate, exactly what I'd expect from someone whose carefully constructed life had collapsed in a single evening. But it was also calculated, designed to make me feel guilty about the consequences of my actions. Marta was still playing games, still trying to manipulate the situation to her advantage. She made her choice, I continued. Victoria might have created the opportunity, but Marta chose to walk into that hotel room every Thursday for 3 months. She chose to lie to me, to our children, to everyone who trusted her. The fact that she was being manipulated doesn't excuse the manipulation she participated in. Linda nodded, understanding the distinction. Victoria was the architect of the conspiracy, but Marta had been a willing participant once she'd decided that excitement was more important than integrity. Saturday night arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if the weather itself was conspiring to ensure maximum attendance at the Chamber of Commerce dinner. I dressed carefully in my best suit, the one I'd worn to our wedding 23 years ago. If this was going to be my final performance as the wronged husband, I wanted to look the part. The community center was packed, nearly 300 people filling the main hall for dinner and the annual awards ceremony. I spotted Victoria immediately, sitting near the back in a black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She looked confident and predatory, like a shark that had learned how power worked and was waiting for the chaos to start. Linda was positioned near the front, her laptop connected to the venue's audio-visual system. She'd volunteered to help with the evening's presentations, a civic-minded gesture that had given her complete control over what appeared on the room's large screens. The dinner proceeded normally for the first hour. Speeches from local politicians, recognition of community volunteers, the usual mix of civic pride and business networking that defined these events. Victoria watched it all with barely concealed impatience, probably wondering when the entertainment would begin. She didn't have to wait much longer. I'd been invited to present the award for small business excellence, a recognition of my accounting firm's contribution to the local economy. It was supposed to be a brief, ceremonial moment. Shake hands, pose for photos, make a short speech about the importance of supporting local businesses. Instead, it became the platform for the most devastating public revelation in Woodpine's history. Before I present this award, I said, approaching the podium, I'd like to share a story about business ethics, family loyalty, and the consequences of revenge. The room fell silent, sensing that something unexpected was about to happen. Linda's fingers moved across her laptop keyboard, and the first image appeared on the screens. A photo of Victoria and Jake at their coffee shop meeting 3 months ago. 2 years ago, a local business owner lost a major client due to fraudulent billing practices. Instead of accepting responsibility for her actions, she decided that someone else was to blame for her downfall. Someone who had helped that client recover their stolen money. More images appeared. Bank records showing payments from Victoria to Jake, email exchanges discussing their plan to seduce my wife, photographs of Victoria meeting with both conspirators to coordinate their activities. What followed was an elaborate revenge scheme designed to destroy an innocent family and ruin a man's reputation. The business owner recruited her sister's boss to seduce her own sister, then used that affair to humiliate the sister's husband and damage his standing in the community. The room erupted in shocked murmurs as people recognized the faces on the screen. Victoria had gone pale, her confident expression replaced by panic as she realized her carefully hidden conspiracy was being exposed to the entire business community. The sister was manipulated into betraying her marriage, the boss was blackmailed into continuing an affair he wanted to end, and an entire family was nearly destroyed. all because someone couldn't accept the consequences of her own criminal behavior. I gestured toward Victoria, who was now standing and pushing toward the exit. But Linda had anticipated this, positioning allies near the doors to ensure she couldn't escape before the presentation was complete. Ladies and gentlemen, I present Victoria Chen, business owner, sister, and the architect of the most elaborate revenge scheme in our town's history. The screens now showed Victoria's financial records, proof of her fraudulent billing practices, evidence of her manipulation and blackmail. Every dirty secret, every criminal act, every moment of calculated cruelty was displayed for the community to witness. Victoria finally reached the exit, but not before the damage was complete. 300 people had seen the evidence of her crimes, her manipulations, her willingness to destroy her own sister's marriage for the sake of petty revenge. The story would be all over social media within minutes, spread throughout the region by morning. I returned to the podium as security escorted Victoria from the building. The award for small business excellence goes to Morrison's boxing gym, where Pete Morrison has spent 15 years teaching young people that integrity matters more than winning, that character is built through honest effort, not clever schemes. The applause was thunderous, but I barely heard it. I was watching the exit where Victoria had disappeared, knowing that her life in Woodpine was over, her reputation destroyed beyond repair, her remaining business prospects eliminated by a single evening's revelation. Linda joined me as people began to leave, the evening's entertainment having exceeded everyone's expectations. "Think she'll try to come back?" she asked. "Would you? After that performance, she'll be lucky to find work in another state, let alone another town." We walked out together into the warm night air, two conspirators who'd successfully completed the most complex revenge operation in local history. Jake was unemployed and divorced, Marta was facing social exile and financial ruin, and Victoria was fleeing town with her reputation in ruins. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You win. I hope you're satisfied with destroying 3 lives for the sake of your precious pride." I showed the message to Linda, who laughed. "Victoria? Has to be. Still trying to make this about pride instead of justice." I typed back a simple response. "Justice isn't about satisfaction. It's about consequences. You should have remembered that before you decided to play games with other people's lives." The reply came immediately. "This isn't over." I deleted the message and put my phone away. Victoria was wrong. It was over, at least for her. She'd gambled everything on a revenge scheme that had ultimately destroyed her more completely than it had ever threatened to destroy me. But she was also right about one thing. I was satisfied, deeply and completely satisfied, with the way justice had been served. The quiet accountant from Woodpine had learned to play games that his enemies never saw coming, and he'd won every round. The last laugh, as it turned out, belonged to me. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows of my house now, officially, since the divorce was finalized last month. I sat at the same table where this all began, drinking coffee and reading the local newspaper's business section. The headline made me smile. "New accounting firm expands, hires 3 additional staff members." My practice had grown exponentially since the Chamber of Commerce dinner. Apparently, the business community appreciated someone who could uncover complex financial conspiracies and wasn't afraid to expose the truth publicly. I'd become Woodpine's go-to accountant for sensitive investigations, the man you called when you suspected someone was stealing from you but needed proof that would hold up in court. Linda knocked on the back door at 8 o'clock, carrying 2 travel mugs of coffee and the morning mail. We'd developed a comfortable routine over the past few months. Business partners, friends, and something that might eventually become more if we ever decided to complicate our lives with romance again. "Anything interesting?" I asked, accepting one of the mugs. "Letter from Victoria's attorney. She's requesting a meeting to discuss mutual interests and potential resolution of outstanding issues." I laughed, a sound that had become more frequent as the months passed. She wants to negotiate? Apparently, though I can't imagine what she thinks she has to offer at this point. Victoria had fled to Phoenix after the chamber dinner, but her problems had followed her there. The evidence we'd presented had been forwarded to law enforcement, resulting in fraud charges that were still working their way through the court system. Her business license had been revoked, her professional certification suspended, and her reputation in the marketing industry was permanently destroyed. Let her attorney know that I'm not interested in negotiations, I said. She made her choices, and now she gets to live with the consequences. Linda nodded and made a note in her phone. She'd become my unofficial partner in managing the aftermath of our revenge campaign, helping coordinate legal responses and media inquiries with the same methodical precision she'd brought to destroying her husband's career. Jake had moved to another state as well, though his departure had been less voluntary. No one in the region would hire him after word spread about his affair and the circumstances of his termination. Last I'd heard, he was working for a small firm in Nebraska, making a fraction of his previous salary and living in a studio apartment that probably cost more than he could afford. Marta was still in Woodpine, though barely. She'd found work at a small marketing company in the next town over, a significant step down from her previous position at Hartwell and Associates. We saw each other occasionally at school events for our children, maintaining the polite distance of people who'd shared a life, but no longer shared anything else. The kids had adjusted better than I'd expected. Ross had initially been angry about the public nature of the revelations, but he'd come to understand that some truths were too important to keep private. Amelia had been more supportive from the beginning, perhaps because she'd always been suspicious of her mother's Thursday evening work meetings. Both of them lived with me now, having chosen sides in the divorce with a clarity that had surprised the family court judge. They'd seen the evidence, understood the scope of their mother's deception, and decided that integrity mattered more than maintaining family harmony. "Any regrets?" Linda asked, settling into the chair that Marta used to occupy. It was a question she asked periodically, usually when some new consequence of our actions came to light. Last month, it had been Jake's bankruptcy filing. The week before, news that Victoria's fraud case was going to trial. About the methods? Sometimes. About the results? Never. And that was true. The dinner party massacre had been brutal. The Chamber of Commerce revelation had been devastating, and the systematic destruction of 3 lives had been more complete than I'd originally planned. At times, when I replayed it all in my head, even I was surprised by how thoroughly everything had unraveled once the truth was exposed. But every action had been justified by the evidence. Every consequence had been proportional to the crimes committed against my family. I hadn't invented anything or exaggerated a single detail. I'd simply connected dots that others assumed no one would bother to notice. They thought they were smarter than everyone else, I continued. Thought they could lie and cheat and manipulate without facing any real consequences. They were wrong. Saying it out loud no longer carried bitterness. It sounded more like a conclusion, the final line of an equation that had finally balanced itself. Linda smiled, the expression of someone who'd learned the same lesson about the importance of accountability. It wasn't a triumphant smile, more a quiet acknowledgement that some people only understood the world when it pushed back. Pete called this morning. He wants to know if you're interested in teaching a class at the gym. What kind of class? I asked, already sensing where this was going. Self-defense for people going through difficult divorces. He thinks there's a market for it. She shrugged lightly, but her eyes were serious. Pete wasn't wrong. Neither was she. The idea had merit. Woodpine was full of people trapped in bad marriages, suffering in silence because they didn't know how to fight back effectively. People who thought endurance was the same as dignity. I could teach them what I'd learned, how to document evidence, build cases, and expose the truth in ways that couldn't be denied or minimized. Not violence, precision, patience, preparation. Tell him I'll think about it. But I was already thinking about it. planning curriculum, and identifying potential students. I imagined small groups, quiet rooms, people who didn't see themselves as fighters learning that intelligence and restraint could be sharper than any weapon. The quiet accountant had discovered a talent for warfare, and there were plenty of battles left to fight in a town where secrets and lies were as common as morning coffee. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw the newspaper article. Congratulations on your success. You've learned to play the game well. I showed the message to Linda, who frowned. Victoria again? Different number, but same writing style. She's still keeping tabs on us. There was no fear in my voice anymore, only mild annoyance, like spotting an old stain that refused to fully wash out. I typed back, not playing games anymore, just living honestly and expecting others to do the same. You should try it. The response came quickly. Honesty is overrated. Games are more fun. I deleted the entire conversation and blocked the number. Victoria could send messages from a dozen different phones, but it wouldn't change anything. Her power to hurt me or my family was gone, destroyed as completely as her reputation and her business. Whatever moves she thought she still had left, they existed only in her imagination. Linda and I finished our coffee and prepared for another day of legitimate work. Tax returns, financial audits, business consulting that actually helped people instead of destroying them. There was something grounding about returning to ordinary responsibilities. The revenge phase of my life was over, replaced by something more sustainable and ultimately more satisfying. But as I locked the house and walked to my car, I found myself humming that old song again, the one I'd discovered during the darkest days of discovering Marta's betrayal. It had become my theme song, a reminder that quiet people shouldn't be underestimated, that patience was a weapon, and that justice delayed wasn't necessarily justice denied. The last laugh at Mills Lake had indeed belonged to me, and the echo was still reverberating through the lives of everyone who'd thought they could make me a fool. Some lessons, I reflected as I drove through the familiar streets of Woodpine, were worth teaching more than once.